Welcome back, everybody. It's 1:15, and we are back to talk about Reach Up. We have Deputy Commissioner Miranda Gray joining us again. We appreciate you setting up aside a lot of your day today to join us. And so she'll be giving us some updates about Reach Up and the Reach Up study. So yeah, go ahead, Miranda.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me again. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Oops, but I need the sharing to be turned back on, I guess.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Should be all set now.
All right, thank you. Right. Looks like you can see it. So I just thought I would start with some of the questions that I was asked, and then happy to jump into the ratable report. So this is the latest data that we have is the state fiscal year 24. So we were supporting 5,102 households in the Reach Up program throughout the course of the year, which was 13,314 recipients. And we were asked,
What?
Miranda, can you enlarge?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
You got to zoom in on your end, Miranda. I can't from here.
There we go. Oh,
Perfect, thank you.
thank you.
You're welcome. Are you able to see the full sentence? I zoomed in so much I can't, but
You can see to the total line of the second box. Oh,
yeah. And then make it too small then. I'm going to see if I can find a happy medium here. Maybe.
Scroll down. Needed.
Yeah, I guess it's either 200 or 300. So, all right. So the next one is what is the breakdown of number of infants, children, and youth served? And I'm going to go bigger so that we can actually see those numbers. So children under the age of 1 is 479. Children ages 1 through 5 is 2,698. And then children aged 6 through 18 is 5,585. And then the last question that I was asked about the kind of the Reach Up program itself was the average length of time that people spend on Reach Up, and that's 50 months, with an important caveat of that does not include child-only cases because they do not accumulate countable months. So that would be pulling that population out, but on average, the rest of the caseload spends about 50 months. All right, with that, I'm going to shrink it just a little bit there again. And the next thing that I was asked to do was to kind of give a brief synopsis of the Reach Up ratable reduction report. I'm happy to share it is on the legislative website, but happy to put this in the chat so folks can read through it. And a part of that question is, what are the next steps towards removing the ratable reduction? I'll shrink that again so you can actually see it. And then I will increase here again.
I'm just gonna pause. Does everyone know what the ratable reduction is? Okay, Miranda, would you mind giving like a brief explanation before you start?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so
and there
much.
is more examples and try to make it concrete in the report itself. But essentially it is, we determine what the need would be, and then there's a ratable reduction, understanding that we have a block grant, which will tie into kind of the last piece that I talk here is that there's a TANF block grant. It hasn't grown in probably 3 decades. It might be more at this time. And so there isn't more money. Vermont is very generous and has a lot of general fund that we also put into this program to be able to support more folks, because federally it is a 5-year of your lifetime program. But Vermont has invested more to be able to support people longer, understanding that things happen throughout a person's lifetime and they might need some additional support. And so the ratable reduction is really looking at what is the need, but then what can we afford based upon the budget that we have to be able to put out. And so that is how we come up with the grant that people would get, and that was just increased. It predates it. I think might be going on 3 years ago now. I was not with this division at that time. But an investment had been made to increase the Reach Up grants a couple years ago. Did that help? And if not, like I said, and maybe I can put it in. I'm sorry, Zoom is not my normal.
What it boils down to is they figure out what the cost of living, what your family needs to live according to the amount of children, and then they cut it in half. So they get half of what they need. You get half of what you need to exist. So that's showing the increases. If we bring up the rateable reduction, get rid of it, basically is how we term it. And what it would cost to give them the full benefit.
And that covers everything?
Well, the,
Housing, food.
the way that the need, I think, is created, please correct me if I'm mistaken, is it's a 2001 cost of housing number coupled with a 2019 basic needs number. So that's the number that's used for the budget for families before it's cut in half. So it wouldn't.
It's housing then, mainly housing?
Well, there's other benefits.
Yeah.
I mean, people get
Yeah.
other benefits in addition to the reach up check.
Yeah.
The housing portion, I believe, please correct me, it's 400 outside of Chittenden and 450 in Chittenden is sort of the portion of the
Gotcha.
population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I did just get the report into the chat. That's helpful. In page 3 kind of breaks down what is the basic needs, what is the shelter allowance, what is the special housing allowance, as it is complex, but you all did a great job in the room of talking about what it is, and then also give some examples of what would happen if we change the rateable. So as you can see in the chart, this is pulled exactly from this report. What we had found is that it would continue to increase the amount of budget that we would need to be able to, if we want to say, if it can work either way, increase or decrease the rateable reduction up to a $26.6 million increase in year 5. But however, there's like a nuance to that. Since the caseload would also increase because of, by increasing that benefit, there would be more households that we aren't serving now that potentially would be eligible. What we're thinking is really that it would be, up to like $53 million that we would need in year 5 in order to be able to remove the rateable reduction, which also just gets into not creating a disincentive. All right, you could have people who are working full time, but they would have less of a benefit than they would if they were on Reach Up. And ultimately, our goal in Reach Up is to try to help people become successful in some career path or to increase their education so that they can get into some form of career to be able to not need this benefit. Just trying to see if there are others. In addition, so I think the other part of, what are we doing to look into this? We would need more infrastructure to be able to support this change. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of our IT system. We are in the process of trying to get a new system. We have been for a little bit. That's the integrated eligibility system. And so Reach Up is a part of that, but that's still a little bit out. It is hard for us in our current system to be able to make changes. There would be staff training, there would be communication that we'd have to do, updating programs and materials, changing rules and procedures. And then as well, understanding that we would be increasing our caseload. And so that would also have an impact to our current workforce. I think I don't want to be too redundant. It could also, this would have implications for our Reach Ahead program, which is the program that helps people once you have employment, whether it's been you come from Reach Up or our post-secondary education program, you go into Reach Ahead, and that is a food benefit that helps support families and gives them access to support services as well once they're employed. So you could imagine if more people are staying in the Reach Up program, our Reach Ahead program would also decrease, if not quite significantly. And then just for context, we have a $47 million federal TANF block grant, and that is what we can't have any additional. There is no additional federal funding for this. That just gives you kind of the highlights why we haven't been moving forward with anything right now.
Can you scroll down a little bit, just so we can see the bottom of the page, the last, I think there might have been one more.
Oh, the next one, I think this is it, and then it goes into the next thing that I'll be talking about with you. So yeah, I really just tried to pull out the high level. Really, the report was about like what would it cost the state of Vermont, and it is, you know, giving you the range of what that cost would be, which is it's not insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
And I will follow up at the end of today. I think we would have been able to get questions from earlier in the day answered as well to be able to share with you. So we'll make sure you get this for a reference.
Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Just, you said that the Reach Up block grant is 45 million for the state of Vermont?
47, yep.
47? And so is there a breakdown that exists of how much of that gets into the pockets of low-income families with children and what the remaining, because I take it that 2024, that's the existing, so 26,791,000 goes to the Reach Up benefit. So where does the rest of the money go?
No, oh, sorry. So two things. I don't have the breakdown, but I'm happy to tell you where that current 47 million goes. And then this chart that I'm showing is what the additional cost. So on top of there's $47 million, we also have general fund. And then this would be an additional need to be able to remove that rateable reduction.
Right.
So on top of what we're spending. Currently, the block grant goes into both grants out to households. It also helps the Child Development Division to be able to help support Vermont children who would be eligible to pay for childcare. And then there is also some money that goes into the Family Services Division. And that has happened also for many, many decades. So also supporting families and children.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I clarify? So the annual cost that's listed here, does that include both the benefit amounts and the sort of administrative staffing costs? Like, what is included in the 26.7 million, just current status quo?
This is, I want to say this is just the grants, not the administration of the program, because that is significant. We have case managers, we have a central office Reach Up team that supports those case managers, as well as other district office supports, supervisors, district directors, business office support, if it is a benefit, and there's a lot of federal reporting that is due, our own internal reporting. So yeah, this is what that would cost, but that is I think the additional piece that I was talking about, like there would be significant administrative costs as well to doing this.
And then I can't see people on Zoom. Do any of you have questions? We'll also have we'll have Donna Bailey's here as well. And then we'll have some more time for questions at the end. Okay, Donna, you wanna join us?
I had a question, just a comment. I imagine that the 2026 is skipped on accident, that it's not intentional to not make an increase in that year.
That's a great, thank you. I will take a look at that.
Hello. My name is Donna Bailey, and I'm the director of the Addison County Parent Child Center. I just first want to say thank you for inviting me to speak and to think about the importance of Reach Up for funding for families and the need for Vermont to be really thoughtful in how we can help families to move out of poverty. I also just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that Vermont recently lost a leader in the fight to end poverty and to treat people and the planet with dignity. And I just couldn't come here today without mentioning Kurt McCormick. And I feel like his spirit is in this council moving forward. And that makes me really proud to be a Vermonter and to do this work. So thank you. Parent-child centers help young families, and we have a focus on helping the most vulnerable families in Vermont. Many have lived in generational poverty. And I think a two-generational approach is really important to breaking the cycle of poverty, and supporting parents always means better outcomes for children. In our country, we've been through so many policy changes, and we continue to have cultural attitudes and, that place the blame of being poor on the person living in poverty. We know that this is not accurate, as most Americans who are poor are children. And we also know that there are more women who live in poverty than men. And these facts tell us that we have a lot of work to do in terms of equity and policy, and it's not the fault of the individual. There is shame and stigma attached to poverty, and there are many cultural and political biases that promote these divisions. This is a systemic issue that we need to solve in our state and our nation. I have been at the Parent-Child Center in Addison County since 1998, and I've seen many changes for the good in our society. Due to programs that have been in place for around 50 years, people have gained in literacy rates, teen pregnancies have dropped by 40% across the nation. More people have access to training programs and education and childcare, and we're all better off in some ways. People are still struggling financially and in terms of basic needs. Housing, food, transportation, and healthcare are still a struggle for families. I think it's important to recognize that even through all the policy changes, from TANF being an entitlement program during the Carter administration to welfare to work, to time limits and more, average stays on welfare have not changed significantly. What this tells me again is that TANF is a basic safety net for families to turn to when they have no other choice. It's also true that families do not enjoy being on welfare. It's demeaning, it's degrading, and it's hard. There are so many hoops to jump through: paperwork, follow-up paperwork, appointments, judgment by others, fear of state systems taking your children, lack of natural supports, and the need to rely on community agencies, and mostly, there's not enough money. I recently spent 4 hours on hold waiting for a mandatory appointment for my own child-only grant. I have a phone plan and I have a flexible schedule, but I sat there fuming at the reality of what this means for a young parent who must use all their phone minutes and then have people judge them for not calling back or not being able to complete the call. This is unacceptable. We use outdated figures to determine what a family needs for income, and then we can say the family can have half of that amount. We tell folks to take budgeting classes. And I don't know about you, but I think that any single mother with one child who can budget $536 in a month for groceries and $665 for all other expenses understands budgeting. I think it's important that we support families as they need help and support, and budgeting may be one of those things that some families need. But I recoil at the idea that a budgeting class will change the basic unfair economic structure that we have. We need to increase the amount of money families get by updating the formula used to determine amounts. This will require increased spending, as you know, and it's important that Vermonters have their basic needs met. I believe a successful Reach Up program in Vermont would mean that there are more people enrolled, not less. It would increase incomes for families. There would be enough to help people with basic needs and moving to a place to be self-sufficient without falling off the economic cliff that awaits many recipients now. There's no healthcare in entry-level jobs, no supports for housing, no safety net. In a successful program, childhood poverty would be ending not only because of a tax credit, yes, that helps, but there are so many other economic and social factors that impact a family's level of poverty. A successful system would be based on prevention and support, not on penalizing people. We would not be waiting for people to have to be late for rent to get support, which is what we do now, or get cut from Reach Up and healthcare programs without the necessary help to stay on. These punitive approaches are stressful and degrading. To support people to do better, we need a strengths-based, developmentally appropriate approach that considers each family's strengths and needs, education, training, transportation, mental health, physical health, and basic needs. With the existing punitive approach for families, there's also a cost shift to community agencies. In preventative approach, this system would work with community agencies to support the individuals and families with dignity. The ways people get cut off from Medicaid and Reach Up now impacts our agency's ability to be funded to pay for families. We don't get notified, and we have to bill for some of our services. So when folks are taken off of Medicaid or Reach Up or housing lapses due to a form not being handed in that we didn't know about, we don't get paid. And then the families in crisis, they need more support. We give that to them because that's what people need. And then we're left holding that. So that's not the best I think we can do in Vermont. I'm so glad that this council is meeting again, and I look forward actually to working with you all and to really help to end childhood poverty in Vermont. And I think if children and families in this great state are poor, we're failing. Our state could do more to help children and families thrive and not just survive. It is a matter of priorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Okay, I will open it back up for questions, comments, thoughts to Donna or the Deputy Commissioner. Go ahead.
Yep. This is me on my committee. This makes my committee chair crazy. Yeah, I just have so many questions. So if you could choose like 3 priorities, top priorities, in terms of what do you think would make the biggest difference, the top 3 things, what would that be?
I think that, all right, I'm gonna say it right off the top of my head, so. I think the number 1 is put more money in people's pockets. So families deserve to have more money. I mean, to try to live on the numbers I just said for a single mom, with 1 child, it's not enough money. So I would say that also, I think we need to think of, like I was saying, I think for people who need support, there needs to be available programming to help people be able to be in a place to be self-sufficient and independent. So with community resources, and I think we have those, and I've seen us over time when welfare to work came into play under the Clinton administration. Vermont was really great at buffering families, quite frankly, from a lot of those rules in the way that we work together in government and in community agencies to be able to both bring resources together, but also to think about developmentally, like teens and kids were treated, young parents were treated differently in the sense that we knew they had to complete school and move transitions into adulthood for themselves and needed supports there, right? So to be able to do that, I think is critically important. So, and I think, obviously with substance, that includes like substance issues and treatment and mental health. And I think there are times in people's lives that they need support and help, and not everybody has a family that can do that. So we need to work together on that. And thirdly, I'm stuck between housing and healthcare.
I was gonna say housing.
You know, I'm sort of, you know, and I feel like, again, we've done a lot of work on children's health, not enough. But we've done a lot, but there's still so much to do for healthcare. And I recognize that's a problem in our whole nation, but I think that, that's really critical. But the housing stock and the cost of housing is, you know, just if you have an income such as Reach Up, it's impossible, without a voucher. And right now, we have a program that helps families get vouchers. And there's a lot of bureaucracies that's weighing us down there, but there's also not a housing stock to move people. So then we get stuck where we can't help people move on.
Thank you.
Sure.
Might be hard to answer, but I'm curious. What is the cost of us underfunding Reach Up for families? Like, what do families have to do to make it work, and what happens when they don't make it work?
I think that a quote just came to my mind that morality is a costly luxury. You know, like sometimes it's very difficult. We have to make hard decisions in our lives. And when we're trying to protect our children, that's, you know, we're going to think about their safety and well-being first. And so sometimes people have to make choices about who they live with, how they're living, where, things like that, that are difficult and not necessarily the safest thing, but it's also about, you know, trying to create a bit of a safety net for their kids. I think, you know, without a doubt, we want the best for our children. And I think it's really challenging with, I think there's a lot of social stigma and judgment and all of that as well. So I think that's hard for families. And I had another thing, point just went out of my brain, but anyway, so I think the other thing is that it's hard for many of us to think that other families might grow up differently than ours did. So we have to sort of get out of our own heads about the way we think kids should be or grow up, or the way it's going to look, or what what it looks like in your own path, and you give room for people to have their own way and to be, but also know that not everybody had supports or learned in the same way. And I think a lot that, you know, those of us who do this work often come from the middle class, and there's some cultural, you know, again, judgment, stigma, things like that about poverty, and then workers are in a place where they can really make calls about other people's lives. So I think there needs to be really some training around sensitivity, and I think some people obviously have that, but I think that it's really important. I mean, you don't have to be poor to understand poverty, but I think we do have to open our minds to think about, you know, what's the goal that we all want to get to. So, and it might, you know, there's variances, but I also think that there's a real misunderstanding about, you know, this idea, and Commissioner Gray said, you know, that it might be less of a benefit to go off of welfare in some situations. And I think that people jump off of welfare too quickly sometimes, because it's like they don't want to be there. There's a lot of judgment about being, and it's hard, you know, and if you missed a piece of paper, or you missed this, you have to go do that. And, you know, there's all of those things too. But I think that it's just simply not the case that people are, I mean, right now, that people are better off in the workforce in entry-level jobs. So that, I think that makes us have to think about the whole picture, not just people living in poverty, right? Which you all do all the time, but to think about, you know, the livable wage, and what are the housing costs for everyone, and who's paying for this in a fair and equitable way.
Yeah, do you want to go? I see your hand up on Zoom.
Sure, sorry, it took me a minute to get to my mute. I want to
No worries.
first of all thank you for talking about the stigma associated with poverty. But there's also a lot of assumptions that people make about poverty that I think really get in the way. We act as if poverty is a moral failing on people's parts, rather than the structural cost of the way we do things. And I think it's essential when we're talking about this, we use a lens that humanizes people and doesn't stigmatize them, because many of us were trained in bridges to poverty, which feeds into stereotypes and other things that really cause harm. So I agree. We really need to look at training and talking to those of us who work in the field to truly understand what we are dealing with. So thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts?
One quick question back to the chart that came up. It looked as though 2024, there was like a zero budget. I think that's when the report came out. 2025, there was an appropriation as like the first step to removing the rateable. I don't believe that happened, right? So the chart that came up, we're like maybe about 5 million behind in that process. Is that correct?
That is correct. The report was just what would it look like? What would it cost? So it isn't something that was actually passed. It wasn't legislation. It was just tell us what it would look like if it were to happen. And so we started with a baseline and built upon that.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to just move right into housing and shelter
Sure.
then? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I was asked to talk about the general assistance emergency housing kind of update and data, who is currently being housed and who has been exited. What is the impact of the current iteration of the program on families and staff? And then the last one is, what is the status of alternative shelter development and housing opportunities? And I will give you a high level because there are certainly better experts in this field, that are from the Department of Housing. Sorry, I'm like I'm trying to not use acronyms. Department of Housing and Conservation Board, Development Board. Sorry, I'm like DHCD. You're gonna have to use the acronym on a Friday afternoon. And then I can talk a little bit about the Office of Economic Opportunity if you don't have anybody else coming from them, just in terms of what we have done and adding shelter beds and the additional money that is coming.
That would be great.
Okay. And let me know, Jubilee, because I know I talk about this a lot, and I know that you sit in rooms with me where I talk about this a lot, but if I'm not going in detail enough, I'm happy to pause and go deeper and level set for folks that maybe aren't in the weeds of this daily. The first thing that I thought I would share is we have a website. It's been up for quite a few months. I want to say we're maybe on month 10 now, somewhere around then. Just understanding that a lot of people wanted to know who is Economic Services Housing in the GA program. What are those numbers? Just because we've also had a number of programs and people trying to keep track of what program we are running and what those rules might be for folks, and where those numbers has been a little tricky. So I just put that in the chat. And then I'm going to share my screen because I'm thinking that this website will be helpful for you all for a number of reasons. So this is current data of who we are housing and by category. So this July, we had Act 113 was passed, and it created new categories. It did change some of those changes, and we need to remove this. There is no longer a cohort.
Miranda? are you able to,
Zoom.
zoom your screen a little bit? Oh, you don't have a computer.
If you can, it's fine. but
Yeah.
there's a lot of squinting.
Yeah, let me, no.
Thank you.
Because it's off of the website, so maybe, no, that's a search. If anybody has suggestions on how, when you're sharing a screen and you can zoom in on a website. I am open to that.
Miranda, it's Mike Ferrant. Are you on a laptop or a desktop computer?
Laptop.
Yeah, so if you hold down the control button and hit the plus sign, that usually will zoom in on a website.
Okay,
Control plus. There you go.
nice. Thank you, Mike. Right.
Thanks for-
It's always good to ask for help. So I apologize. This shouldn't say in the cohort anymore. We did have a cohort that ended on June 30th for folks that have been extended through the Budget Adjustment Act. But there was a change there where last summer we were serving people, if an older Vermonter was defined as someone age 60 and older, and with the new law that was passed is the age 65 and older. I'm trying to think, a pregnant individual that used to be, and this is kind of the ebbed and flowed throughout the pandemic, that used to be someone only in their third trimester, now it's at in any trimester of their pregnancy. And then the change that we also maintained is family with children is for a child age 19 and younger, and that used to be age 6 and younger. Pre-pandemic, probably the last when you used to be working on this task force. So those are some of the changes, but another change that did happen is you now have to meet one of these categories during the winter in order to be housed. So we do have a population that will not be eligible for GA housing this winter who normally have access to the program, and that is because before you used to share with economic services that you didn't have access to shelter and then you were able to stay during adverse weather conditions. So as you can see, the largest populations of which really has been kind of a trend throughout the time that we have been seeing, really since the pandemic, higher levels of households accessing is those with disability. Another change that was enacted through the Budget Adjustment Act with the implementation of a form. Previously, the definition of a disability was for those with Social Security income or Social Security disability income. This form allowed for a medical professional to be able to attest to the fact that someone had a disability and needed shelter. So that number is high. And then also families with children. So it's the disability variance is the 133. So we have 133 households we're housing now because of the form versus 346 because of either Social Security or Social Security disability income. Coupled with that, I was asked how many people have exited and where those demographics. So it is because those are our larger populations. Those are the folks that have been leaving. We have had through September, excuse me, 552 households that have exhausted their 80 nights of housing, and that consists of 666 adults and 256 children. We are anticipating, although I will mention that it changes quite rapidly, that there's probably another 350 households that will reach their 80 nights as we get through October. And I say that this changes because we are finding some people, come in and they stay with us for a few days, a few weeks, and then other people will stay through their duration of their 80 nights. These 80 nights it was for the period of July 1st through November 30th, and then again, April 1st through June 30th. So that is when you can use your 80 nights. From December 1st until March 31st is adverse weather conditions. So anybody in these eligibility categories would be eligible to use a motel room during that winter, what we call adverse weather conditions, pending that we have space. And I must nuance that we are never able to house everyone that has a need in the winter. We are always having to tell people that I'm sorry, we don't have a room available for you. In addition, we are often asked about, usually people want county, we run in district offices, and so there is also information on the number of rooms. Another part of the law that was passed on July 1st was a room cap. And so on September 15th, we had to get down to 1,100 rooms that were being used. Throughout the summer, we were using about 1,400, we were having about 1,450 households. As you might imagine, some households are larger and need to use multiple rooms. As of this Monday, when we pulled data, so we pulled this website is updated every Tuesday. We were using the total of 852 rooms. We have seen a decline. It is lower this week, in particular because we have still, part of the law is the income contributions. So if someone has a form of income, they need to pay for some of their motel nights. And so it is lower now because we have people that are paying for their room, and that ranges. We have some people who only have to pay for one night of their room. And then we have others that are paying over 10 nights. And so that also is why we had a wide range of people kind of reaching their 80th night, is because of the income contributions component. And then just also so that you know, because I think might also be helpful, is on this website, there is also, we have a legislative report that is due monthly on this. And so we have it linked here. It is also on the legislative website. But just thought I would mention, we've tried to have a space where it's kind of everything that we have going on here is linked. I'm just going to peek again at the questions to make sure that I'm I guess, Jubilee, I'm wondering if there's any questions on that before I get into, you know, kind of like the impact on families and staff.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and maybe you will go into it in the next section. I really appreciate the data on number of families and children. Do you have it broken down, kind of the age groups of children within this population?
So we've had points in time, and I have to see what the latest point in time is. One thing with this program is that it is ever evolving. What I share with you from Tuesday is not accurate today. But I can see, because I know that we have, and I'm just trying to remember how long ago it was that someone had asked. And then we also, depending on the level of information and the how granular, like people have asked, you know, broken down by district, we have to be really careful because some of those numbers are really small and we're not actually able to share because it is identifiable. That is, but yeah, okay. I'll see what we have, Jubilee.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions on this particular set? Yeah, go for it.
I have one clarifying question just about the adverse weather. I know you mentioned December 1st. For families with kids from now until December 1st, is there still a temperature threshold? Does that exist anymore, or is that no longer?
It is no longer. And that used to be, there were kind of bridge seasons. And so there was what we would call night to night. And so that would be if the temperature and then the precipitation reached a certain combination in November, we would open up night to night before it went into like a block of time. The law no longer has these kind of bridges on either side of the block of time for anyone. I have a couple questions online, Jubilee, Frank, and then Taya.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't I'm
happy to help
you right now. So if you want to speak up and ask your questions if you're on Zoom.
And both of these websites are posted to the committees or the council's website now too.
Okay, great, thanks, Mike.
So you can look on your house.
Thanks, Miranda, for me. I just question, do you have a sense at this point of like the universe of rooms that you expect that will be available on December 1 when winter weather hits?
Yeah, so I mean, we were using and still turning a lot of folks away this summer. And so it is about 1,450 rooms that we will have available.
And do you think all those will remain available? Like they won't be in the interim of like when the 1,100 cap hit, like they won't transition those out of the program?
We haven't heard that. I mean, I'll take that back. We had heard from some motel owners that they might need to look at something, but I will also say that I get outreach individually from motel owners who are just kind of wondering, wanting to clarify it isn't until December 1st. So I think we probably will have that capacity for this winter. What I don't know is what will happen once we get to the spring, because then we are talking about a even smaller population, right? Because we've had a lot of people who needed to use their 80 days already.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my question is, do you have data that breaks down or disaggregates by race to see if any groups are disproportionately represented?
So we do have data, Kaya, and that is another data set that I think because you are a state employee and the role that you hold, we probably would be able to share that with you. But globally, some of the data set is so small that we're looking at how to be able to share information with people, but without it becoming identifiable.
Yeah, let's have a conversation. I have some thoughts on how to do it.
Thank you. That'd be great.
But do you have a sense by any chance right now whether, I mean, obviously when we're looking at disability, we have a disproportionate amount. Are there other groups that are disproportionately represented?
I think you're right. It has been like the group in the disability, and what is also tricky is at some point the department is having to put some people fall into multiple categories. But what we do is we try to put people in the easiest category for them to get into, right? So the easiest thing is to be able to show that you have children versus us having to obtain information that you have Social Security income, although that isn't generally speaking too hard if you're known to our system in some other way because we do have a match, but like getting the variance form is another lift because you have to engage with the medical professional to be able to get that. So,
and I would assume also computer systems getting in the way of good data.
Yes. Well, I can say that we are no longer just working off of Excel sheets, which is what we did the entirety of the pandemic. Last summer, we were able to get into a system, but it is still each day there's a request that we're like, oh, that would be great if we had built that in. We didn't. And so there are, we keep trying to gather what would be helpful. And then as we are able to add some enhancements to our system to be able to give us, for example, we were manually having to count through case notes how many nights people had used prior to actually August of this year. So that has been a challenge to say the least.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm just wondering with the families with children, do you know how many of those children are school age children?
I don't off the top of my head, but I'm willing to bet I might get a ping while we're meeting here if there are other questions that can help me with that one. Oh, and I am getting that we haven't pulled it by age range yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Do you have another question, Kaya?
Yeah, go.
Legacy hand, sorry.
I was,
Karen has, yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I'm terrible about raising my hand, my bad. Um, is there been a correlation between families on Reach Up and how many, folks, from in Reach Up, are unhoused and children?
So we do have some families that are on Reach Up that are in housing. We also have a number of families who are not on Reach Up. I'm going to say more were on the not having received Reach Up. We have a lot of people who stay in motels that have some form of income. And as you know, the Reach Up income threshold is to be eligible is quite low.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to move on to the next section then?
Yeah, was there something in particular that you wanted me to address, Jubilee? I don't know. I mean, I'll stop sharing this website, or were you hoping that I would share some parts of the report that we submit monthly? What is helpful, I guess?
Yeah, it would, I guess to hear how the kind of other options, I know you're not the one best suited to speak to this, but I guess a high level, like you mentioned at the beginning, would be helpful.
Yeah, happy to do so. And I can speak more to shelter bed enhancement,
yeah.
Rather than that housing units, but I do know there are investments there, and I do believe there is also on the legislative website as well. VHCB often goes in when I go into the Joint Fiscal Committee to report on their progress in bringing units online, whether that's rehabbing brand new housing units, etc. And so I think they have a pretty good, and then also things that are coming into the future. So I would suggest that as a reference. The Office of Economic Opportunity, which is one of our sister offices, has been working, and I've been able to join many of those conversations. I would say the director, Lily Sojourner, and I spend a lot of time together, and she has been working with her team really hard to try to bring on more shelter beds. And over the last year, they were able to add 100 more. And so that is great. And then in this Act 113, there was also $10 million to try to bring on more shelter beds with the target of a December 1st launch. And so those have been conversations. There was a request for proposal that went out in early July. And we've been working with communities to try to explore what options there might be, in particular looking at, we kind of have like the top 5 places that you would see. I'm still showing the chart, where we've had a larger population of people who are impacted by homelessness. And so that is Barre, Brattleboro, Burlington, Rutland, and Bennington. And so we've been having conversations about what that might look like to add beds. I think if all of the hurdles or barriers are able to come, people are able to overcome them, we're looking to be able to add 100 more beds on December 1st, and with the hope of having some of them be able to be longer term, so that they would remain, but also understand that there are some that will only just be for the winter period.
Do you know,
yep.
In that around 100, do you know how many approximately are likely to be kind of long-term, just overall additions to our shelter beds, and which are more just temporary this year?
I don't have that breakdown, and I think what I know is there are weekly conversations with the different organizations and communities where we're hoping to be able to add more shelter beds, and there's been a lot of change over the last few months in terms of what is possible, understanding that there's just a lot, just be able to find a building that can kind of meet all those needs, and then also having a community that is open to having a shelter is another challenge, and can often be one of the hurdles that we can't overcome as well. So I don't have that, unfortunately, but I think it's getting closer, and that is another, that's a part of the housing report that is on the website where they get into like kind of where our progress is. And I think that is due maybe until we get back into the legislative session.
As we're starting to see some of the usage in hotel rooms drop, I think it's understood a lot of the population who meets the eligibility requirements have now met that 80-day cap, and can't get into hotel rooms until December 1st. Has there been talk of using these GA funds rather than on hotel rooms, but to house some of these families that who have met their 80-day cap, standing up some kind of other option for them besides tents and cars?
So I'm not sure what the other options would be. And I think, we have been willing to engage and hear what ideas people have. I think the ultimate goal, right, would be we would have more housing units, because that's why we find ourselves here, is we don't have enough housing units. I think Donna had mentioned that we have people with vouchers. And the full scope of that, I think, is unknown because there are so many housing vouchers through so many different venues. But people have them, and we still don't have places for people to use them. And then it is incredibly hard to add more shelter capacity. And I know that just as the law states, like for me, my division, we can't house people in motel rooms. So I'm just not sure what the other, aside from, I think probably everyone is well aware of, there's at least 3 letters that I'm aware of at this point that have been sent to the administration asking, but I think that too is like asking for shelter to be stood up, and understanding that that isn't an easy task to do. And also just, I want to make this too political, but something that we did do last spring didn't have a lot of success with having people going. And then understanding, I definitely hear community partners who are saying, like, there were things that were missing. It was felt, and perhaps maybe there would be something else. And I don't know if anybody tunes into the press conferences, but it is something that was addressed there by Secretary Samuelson of, we are trying to understand what the need is. Our field service directors are on the ground and connecting with community partners to really understand who doesn't have another option. And what might that be, so that we're actually right sizing what the need is. I know last time we had big congregate shelters, 50 to 100 beds in a site, and that wasn't. And what we know from other times of the year when we will pop up shelters, and starting with, I will say, with the exception of Burlington, people don't tend to go to those shelters. Those really trying to explore, and I think a lot of that exploration had already been happening from my conversations with community partners. They were really trying to help families, I shouldn't just say families, individuals, explore what options they might have, and also hearing from some of those providers that some individuals and households didn't believe that was really going to happen, which I also understand, because this is not the first time that they had heard that there was going to be a change in the GA program. But this time the change it stopped, like nothing happened to make that not happen. And so I think that was really hard too. Some people maybe had hope that it wasn't going to change, but we continue to engage. We have had some success in getting people into other settings as well. Frank, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to relitigate like what happened last year, but I do think it was a combination of things that made the stand-up shelters after BAA a problem. Like I think you saw in Burlington where there was really well coordinated with local folks and near public transportation where they were utilized, versus like Montpelier where it was not near public transportation. There was not 24-hour, people couldn't leave their stuff. There was just a lot of factors that I think it made it less just possible for people to utilize, and the lack of transportation, like even to get to Montpelier for people who weren't in Montpelier. and just kind of the notice. So I know it was, and I know this was like not your decision, like this was, you know, a whole bunch of decision points that led up to that. But I do like, you know, and I know we had sent the letter to the governor last week about with, you know, I think it was 88 service providers calling on either a special session or using emergency powers or instructing AHS to find additional funds that they have available. And so I guess just like, yeah, I know you can't answer those questions, but I'm just kind of curious if anyone has heard anything around any movement within the administration on kind of responding to those direct requests.
So I could say those because I think there was another letter that came out earlier in the week from the Speaker of the House. So that was something that came up on the press conference of speaking to it. Like there is something that the administration will continue to assess and see, are we able to meet needs on a case-by-case basis, or does something else need to happen? And we do have, they had mentioned we have a triage team. So it is a multi-departmental team, understanding, you know, the numbers aren't reflective here, but it might be because people are put in another category. We have a number of older Vermonters, and so exploring what options might be available to them through the Department of Aging and Independent Living, for people who are experiencing, you know, stuff that would be more connected to a designated agency. We have DMH at the table, so really trying to see, like, are there barriers that we might be able to remove or help make connections, but that's really what we're able to do now. What we're hoping is that cases are brought to us before they reach 80 days, and so that it just gives more time to make people, to help with those connections when we know where the person is, because it becomes more challenging when we don't know, which is also something I'm often asked. I don't know where people are going. They don't have to let the division know. They haven't need to let us know even when before the 80 days was implemented. People kind of come and go. They need to.
Jenna? Jinx.
Thanks. I just have a question, kind of focusing back on children. I wonder if there's a way or a sense of any conversation that Miranda, you're having with OEO or other housing providers to really think about different models for families with children who, and I know people don't need to let you know where they're going to go, when they're going to go, who they're going to go with, but anticipation that we're always going to have a system that helps support children that are experiencing homelessness with their families, and thinking about the expansion of family shelters. I know we have family supported housing, which is fantastic and wonderful about keeping families together once they have housing, but you have to have housing first. So I think about models that we don't currently have or have on small scale, like the Haven has the capacity to have family shelters. Like, how do we think about a family shelter model that works in a transitional sense to get families, keeps families together, and then helps families transition to safe permanent supported housing?
Yeah, no, that's great, Jen. And one of the successes that we had is the Winston Prouty Center down in Brattleboro. They opened up a family shelter, and I think they're back to being full, and they've had people. I was just down in Brattleboro meeting with my team there, and they were talking about a success where somebody had been in the shelter and is now moving into their own apartment. So you're right, that is great. And I know even that is not, I mean, it was a longer term solution. I want to say it's 15 months. I could be a little bit off. It's somewhere between 15 and 18 months because that building is going to be repurposed for another reason. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but like even that, like, but it seems to be successful because you're right, like there's case management, there are resources to wrap around. And I think, you know, we would love for communities to come forward with these ideas and, you know, that they have the support to be able to do that within their communities, because we do need more options, because at this point we don't have enough options to be able to move a family, have their experience be very brief and rare, and that we're moving them into a permanent solution until we get some more units online. And I do have the breakdown right now of the number of children that are currently in the GA program. So we have about 60% are school age, and 40% are under the age of 6. And so understanding that 5 and 6-year-olds can get a little bit tricky about whether they're school age or not. And then there's preschool. But those are kind of the breakdowns right now.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you repeat those again?
Absolutely. So about 60% are school aged and 40% are under the age of 6.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And this is for that group still in hotels right now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It would take us a little bit more to be able to go back.
Yeah, and I know it's a little different each night. Yeah, okay, but just approximate. Yeah, great. Any other questions? Information you'd like to hear from the deputy commissioner? Go for it. What?
I'm just wondering if there's any communication with the Agency of Education about how many kids have been not coming to school because they don't have a regular house.
Yeah, have you, I don't know if you heard that, have you been in communication with the Agency on Education at all? And do you have any idea if there's been any effect on attendance at school with youth and families kind of who've been exited from hotels so far?
So I haven't personally, but I know the Agency of Human Services has, and that's because there is a question that has come up, and also just understanding the McKinney-Vento,
yeah,
kind of policy and what is that impact for folks. So I don't have that information to share today, but I do know that it is looking at that. That is also an avenue of trying to understand what does the Agency of Education need to know from us about what we know, and what can we share that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, ask away.
Just one more question, Miranda, just being an educator and knowing that every time a child moves from anywhere, they lose 6 months of academic learning. I'm wondering if there's any effort to keep children, if they do lose their placement, to try to find them housing within the same district so they can finish off the year possibly.
I think probably every attempt is made by the case manager if they have a case manager in that community. And I just know, like, given the lack of units, I don't know how feasible that is. What I can say is that we have tried to keep people where they are, and right now, because we are below that 1,100 room cap, if people had to originally, they couldn't get a room in their area. This is an opportunity for us to try to get them back to their community as well, because that is something, unfortunately, that once we are close to capacity, or at capacity, we don't have a lot of ability to offer something that we just don't have. If we don't have space in their community or in their district, then we give them the next option that may or may not work for them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any final questions? Okay, Miranda, thank you so much for joining us on a number of topics. I know it was a lot to put together, so we appreciate you joining us, and we'll probably be in touch around other subjects as we continue exploring what our recommendations would be. But thank you so much for joining us. Go rest your voice.
Thank you. Yes, no, and thank you for the opportunity and for what you're doing. I mean, it's really important work, and it does take a lot of great minds to find solutions. So I appreciate it as well. Have a great weekend.
You too. Okay, folks, so we just have time on the agenda just for open discussion. We had some earlier.
Yeah, Rick Morse is there.
Oh my gosh, it is Friday.
It is Friday.
Yes, oh gosh, and I was looking forward to this as well. Vicky, are you ready?
Is there? Oh,
There we
There
go.
we are.
Hey, oh.
Can everybody hear me? My apologies. I was tapping away here. I'll keep it brief, but, and I was just really notified less than 48 hours ago that you needed someone or wanted somebody to do this. And I am, for the record, I'm Rick Morse. I work at Sunrise Family Resource Center. I'm the Family Supportive Housing Coordinator Supervisor and caseworker. So I do carry a caseload as well as supervise and manage 2 other staff. And I think hopefully, and I'm trying to keep this brief, so forgive me because I do have to pick up my grandchild about 10 of. I think what you wanted to hear or talk about is where resources could be produced and what has been what I see as critical success factors for our program. And the first thing that came to mind is the ability to do long-term case management. And we not only engage with families that are homeless with minor children during homelessness and work to give them house. Once they're housed, we're able to stay with them and work with them with the landlord, teach them, tenant resiliency, help them make social connections and other referrals. And every family in this room probably knows is different. So we have we create targeted case plans to work with the family. But not only is it that cut and dry, we try to really engage with the family on a friendship level too, and build that trust and relationship and elevate the families. And in the other big thing, is any questions about kind of that concept? And I'm sorry, I'm kind of rushing through this, but any questions about Bennington's Family Supportive Housing Program, anything like that? Okay, so at that rate too, it comes to mind that our relationship with landlords is critical. And I agree with a lot of things that were said. I came out a little earlier. The housing stock is just as bad everywhere in Bennington as it is everywhere. And I love the idea of a family shelter model. It helps people stay in a central location where we're able to work with them. When people are bouncing all over the county, making meetings is a lot tougher, and focusing on housing makes it a lot tougher on families. Getting groceries, the cost of everything is, and transportation. So those are some challenges we face here. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of success in this program, helping families. And we deal with the tough families. We use the coordinated entry system, and families are prioritized based on critical needs factors. It's like I say, we work with them on anything and everything. Every family presents differently. And, we've had a pretty good success rate here in Bennington. It's tough work, I will say that. So with that said, in my apologies, I'm not really overly prepared here, but I'd be happy to answer questions about the program or what we do, or, any of the concepts that we work on, or, in general.
No, thanks. We appreciate your time. So you talked, developing a family shelter model. What other glaring gaps are you seeing that would have the most impact? Donna Bailey from Madison County Parent Child Center gave us her, her top 3 things we could be doing. I'm wondering what as a state, what yours are.
Okay, so and what I've noticed is what I call the boots on the ground. The case management, being able to stay with the family at the beginning of homelessness, hopefully we're able to house them and stay with them to work with them. Because it can become just as a bumpy road once they're housed, and that is big, you know, so I think, you know, the gap in a lot of agencies can't provide that. FSH is able to provide that. The other one is the housing stock. Many landlords out there, there's a lot of full units and so on. And I do think a gap with, you know, we do have a family, we call it Norton House. We do have a family shelter here, but it's very limited. I don't know how many rooms they have, but it's very, very small. We do have like a single occupancy shelter as well. And I'd almost, you know, my wish list would be, you know, perhaps a local housing authority could break ground and create more units. I don't know if that's a feasible financial venture. But overall, I think that, and in my mind, what helps people stay housed is somebody to engage with them. And I've seen a lot of families just simply miss the recertification for Vermont State Housing or another agency, and their lease is terminated. So just having a guy like me or my staff to, you know, jump in and work with this family, and also families that are homeless, it's complicated. And families are, you know, they do struggle to complete the appropriate paperwork and find a path to get a home. So I hope that answers some of your question.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Jenna.
Thanks, Rick. I just I can add to that a little bit. Because at Northeast Kingdom Community Action, we administer family supported housing as well. And I always think of it as more of I know it says housing, and I think people first think it's all about housing, but it's not. I think the whole program is about relations. It is a relational model, and it's not a case management model, it's a coaching model, right? So I think that makes the program very special and different than like being a housing case manager. So it's a lot about child development. It's a lot about parent support and alleviating stressors for families to really preserve family time. And there's a child development component to the program as well. And I think what we see the success of the program is, like Rick said, being able to work with families over time. There's not like 30, 60 days, you're done, and you can be in the program, there's success, that families drive their goals that they'd like to meet as well. So it's really a successful program, but it's definitely, I think about it as a family development program rather than a housing program, where housing becomes the stable piece of the, and we're just doing the support around it, where I think when we think about housing alone, it wouldn't be very successful without the other pieces.
It's that three-legged stool with the housing and that support and then the affordability. Any other?
Just one more thing. Can you, and I know you have to pick up.
Stacy's talking. I don't know if she's talking to us, but you're muted, Stacy. My apologies. I just noticed it. But yes, I agree with that, Jenna. You know, the wraparound services we provide at Sunrise, from childcare. We just recently created a pantry. We have a diaper service. It really is, you know, we're trying to create, you know, and we're not sitting in we're sitting in renovated homes and in our office space. So it's welcoming. And, you know, I think that has a lot to do with it too, is, you know, we ground ourselves with the family and work with them on where they're at in their lives and so on. So any other thoughts, questions? And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not well prepared, but I'm certainly willing to try to answer questions.
I'm not right now, but I'm just wondering if you can imagine, like, let's say 4 stages of transition stages, you know, like the initial, you know, just people coming out of housing, just like, and then listing under there. I know everybody's different, but just like in terms of transitioning to becoming independent, can you envision that? What, like, maybe 4
So
different,
you're asking me 4 stages, beginning with homelessness to success.
yes,
Okay, let me ponder that. Well, first of all, it's, as you can envision, a family that is homeless is very reactive. There's a lot of anxieties, stress, panic, and, especially with children, the heartbreak of that. And at that point, within that stage is a very difficult stage to get the persons to, try to ground themselves a little bit. I see the second stage as, working towards housing, and then third, hopefully obtaining housing, and the fourth, keeping the housing. So within that gamut of those 4 stages, and there's probably a couple in between there, and like I say, every family presents differently. Some move quicker than others, some can, are ready quicker than others. And we also have, the aspect of drug addiction. So there's a different approach to the first stage of that family to make sure they have recovery services and so on. A family that's, perhaps, going through a divorce and the complications of, we've enrolled them in the program, and during enrollment or just after, the family splits up. So there's another, how do you say, dynamic to try to help both adults in the family. So, it's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact 4-stage approach. And that's kind of we have to deal with that as an individual family on an individual basis, I guess you'd say. So hopefully that's a fairly concise answer. I do see a big part of the challenges is once we if we're able to house a family, is keeping them there. And that's training, teaching, coaching, counseling. And I do like the word managing, helping the family manage their finances, financial stability, and so many different things that families may or may not think of as, the important factors in helping the families be more proactive than reactive is another big key. And once they're housed, there's a time period, sometimes it's longer than others, that it takes that for families to become more grounded and more secure. And I've found that many families spend a lot of time just after they're housed, waiting for the shoe to drop, per se. My life can't be, I can't be this successful. I'm setting myself up for failure or something that's going to happen. And us as, and I know, case manager doesn't sound like it isn't a great phase or phrase, but, let's call it coaching. As we coach, and help coach and teach our families how to become stable, build relationships with landlords is a big key. And, building relationship with neighbors. And a lot of our families, we have to house communicably in large facilities. And neighbor Joe might be, dealing drugs, and there's a lot of complications in that, and helping the family manage different aspects of things. And it's, like I say, individual to each family. I hope that answers some of your question.
yeah, it was meant to be very conceptual, so thank you.
You're welcome. I will say one other thing, and I know we all share the same concerns. And I heard, I got on a little early and was listening to the Reach Up conversations. And I do agree with that, a lot of, when we try to talk financial stability with somebody who is on Reach Up, a lot of daylight there. And to fund more of that would be very helpful for families to at least put more, back into the community, but also to support their families. And we all know the cost of food and rent, everything's just going right through the roof. So that is, one of the concerns with stability and housing on my end of it as well. So
I just had a quick capacity question. I'm curious about how families qualify for family supportive housing, if you have a wait list, how you prioritize, and how long it often takes to match a family with a landlord, and sort of what happens in the interim.
Okay, so we use coordinated entry system where our families are queried and prioritized by the data system. So we take, the list is always in flux, but when we have openings, we go right to the top of the list. We get our CE verification, coordinated entry verifications from Brock, who is a lead agency. We engage with the family, and it's optional. The family can choose to participate or they can choose not to. We have to offer a position in our program to the family based on priority. Our families have to have minor children with a preference of under 6. Homeless according to AHS and HUD definition of homelessness, literally homeless. And of course they have to want to participate. Also, some of the criteria that leads to the critical needs factors is multiple episodes of homelessness, active case with DCF, and at least 1 child under 6. So, as we're able to hopefully move people into housing, feel confident that they are successful, and sometimes, staying with them along quite some time, years. We try never to lose track of where they went, but once they're exited from the program, we're more focused on folks that are actively enrolled. We do have to bill Medicaid, which is a great program to fund the program. But here at Sunrise, I do a lot of peripheral work outside of the program, especially right now. I think I've got over 7 or 8 calls this month alone because the hotel stays coming to a closure for some families. So we're working actively. We also have a housing navigator, and so on. So it's winter's always coming in Vermont. So we're all worried about families. So does that answer your question regarding how it's prioritized? Did I hopefully cover that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
About how many families do you serve kind of in this at a time?
We take between 12 and 15 at a time. We at times have a little more, a little less than 15. Sometimes we're transitioning families in and out. Sometimes it's very difficult to get, we work very hard to connect with the prioritized families. Sometimes they decline to connect after possible weeks of trying to connect, or they decline services. So we try to keep it where we're at capacity at all times because, of course, we have to fund our program through Medicaid. So right now with 3 folks, we could have up to, and I wrote that down and I don't see it, so 15, 45 total in our program. I think we have 43 right now.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And that's with 3 case managers for that
That's
total?
correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
And
the
that
idea is-
feels doable. Just one thing I've been thinking about is like how, to do successful coaching and housing navigation, like how many families or people do we need our supportive services folks? When does it become too much? And so does that kind of ratio seem enough?
I think I understand what you're saying. And I've been doing this work for 7 years now, and at times you have families, and it's a balancing act. Sometimes you might have, out of your 15, you might have 10 constantly in crisis at the beginning of the stages of working with them. There's other times you might have less in crisis where you go on to once a month meetings. Other times you might be meeting with a family 3 times, 5 times a week, or checking in. So it all depends on, the families we're working with. Recently, we just hired another coordinator, and within the 3 of us, we consider the entire caseload, all of our caseloads. We work interchangingly with the families, especially me, to try to add support. If somebody's out, the families know to call me, if it's another caseworker. So, it is manageable. However, there are those flex times where it might seem like everything's, the ships are righted and everybody's doing well. And that's when we start going, wait a minute, what's going on? And So the step down services in determining when to exit families becomes not difficult, but I'd say a challenge in itself, because a lot of families don't want to exit because they like the camaraderie, they like the relationship, and they do appreciate the support. So we try to turn families over quickly as possible, but there is no time limit. And I think that's key to me is we have the ability to stay with the family through the rough times, and after they're housed, a lot of times it can get pretty dicey. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And I know I'm really I'm not a really polished speaker here, so forgive me for that, but I'm hoping I'm clear. Thank you for everybody's time. Any other thoughts or questions? If anybody wants to call me, my name is Rick Morris. I'm here in Bennington. You call Sunrise 802-442-6934. Ask for Rick. I'd be happy to talk or answer any other questions. I see a thumbs up from Jenna. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes, thank you for your work.
Well, thank you all. And like I say, I wasn't very well prepared, but hopefully I answered the questions and gave you a flavor for the tough work that my staff and we do here at Sunrise. And Sunrise is all encompassing. How do you say, wraparound services? We do many, many things here. So, and it's going to be a tough winter. I have to say, I'm getting very worried about a lot of families. So hopefully we can, within the legislature, we can help more families not be out in the cold this year, and I call it, my little t-shirt moment is I envision families living in a truck with no windows in the winter, and winter's always coming. So in Vermont. So anyway, thank you. Is there anything else I can comment on or chew your ear about? I
No,
told
but we
Amy,
may
I
come
said, if you
back
let me
to
go, I'll talk all day. Your ears will bleed. So
go get your grandchild. Yeah.
all right. Well, thank you all.
Thank
If
you.
I haven't met you before, I hope to cross paths someday. So take care. Have a great day. Thank
Bye. Okay, now we have some time. I know some people had to log off and leave, but yeah, we just have a little time for committee discussion. Anyone has some things they're thinking about, things they'd like to keep in mind as we build next agendas? Yeah.
It's probably not as timely because by the time we get to the next meeting, they made a point to show that shelter in Burlington. That was a congregate shelter that had all the empty beds and no one came. But then they also had the story about the family with 2 autistic children who were, given, a tent and they're going to get camped out. And I just can't, I can't imagine, it's 45 degrees at night now, how being in a tent with 2 children who, maybe have, the opportunity to go to school too, that is somehow preferable to even a congregate shelter. And I just don't know why there can't be more resources put into maybe changing some of the congregate shelters into family type situations. It seems like there were some separate offices that could serve as family shelters. And is it just, Miranda's gone, but maybe it's just staffing or for the agency or why there isn't money to do that. But it seemed like there is some available spaces in some of the stand-up shelters that either haven't been used or people haven't known about, especially for families.
Yeah, there was some kind of 3 shelters around the BAA. There was this kind of time where things were up in the air. It was also a very different set of circumstances on who had to leave shelter. I think people knew a fix was coming. Some hotel owners also allowed people to stay there for free, knowing a fix was coming. So I think there were a lot of reasons. Frank mentioned the one was actually in Berlin. It was like 2 miles from town. And folks also couldn't stay there for the day, so they had no way to get there. And if they did, then they were in this place with no bathrooms or sources of food or water. So it just like, of course, no one went to them. So I think there were a lot of contributing factors, and I agree. I think at this point, family shelter is not ideal. It is not best practice, but it's a lot better than having our children sleep in tents, as we start to see. So, yeah, I can't, I know that, as you saw, we had that 1,100 night room cap per night, and that we're not meeting that, now. There is a finite number of people in Vermont who meet the current eligibility criteria. So we'll see that number of utilized rooms go down and down. So those funds could be used. They don't have to just be used for motel rooms. They could be used on developing congregate shelter for people to live in. So those are the possibilities that are there. And I encourage us as a state to take action.
Yeah, and I was going to say, looking at it from my lens, there's a lot of trauma associated with congregate housing and fears of violence, fears of things happening. There's this whole piece too where people don't want to be seen going into a shelter. There's a stigma piece. So there's a lot of emotional pieces that play into families saying, you know, we might be in a tent, but at least we're together. Or I don't have to worry about being vigilant. There's also this fear on a lot of parents' parts. Well, you know, if I go to a shelter and I take my kids, will they take my kids away from me because I don't have a home? So there's a lot of pieces that feed into and cause immense amounts of trauma, which affect their reactions. You know, they're in fight or flight or freeze at pretty much all times right now. So I'm actually not surprised that the shelters weren't used, because I think it's complex and there's more factors, but I do think there's a lot of reasons why people won't go or don't go, you know, including pets. I know that sounds, but you know, for many people, I know for me, my pets are part of my family. And you know, just speaking from experience living down in Florida for a while during hurricanes, you know, you don't want to evacuate because you don't want to leave your pets. It's that same thought, they're part of your family. So it gets really complex.
Yes, thank you for raising those points. I agree.
Yeah, I was not suggesting that
Yeah.
congregate shelters are the answer to, I'm wondering how, you know, if there is available space and, you know, how you could, you know, make that more amenable to folks with families.
Yeah, I didn't think you were suggesting it. I was answering sort of the question of why are there empty beds? Well,
yeah,
these are some of the reasons, because we know.
Sure.
And again, there are people who don't meet the definition of homeless because they're couch surfing. You know, there's that other piece is, you know, our definition of homeless is pretty limited. So there are people who are like, okay, I will go camp out, so I am actually homeless and I can get help.
Thank you.
I'm looking at this in two different conversations. Like one is in the immediate crisis of the moment, like what is available and what are the barriers to, particularly because we're talking about children and families, finding safety for them while we work on the larger long-term solution. And so I feel like we do need to think about right now, because we are experiencing a crisis. And then maybe for some of our future meetings, it might be helpful to also bring in the Office of Child, Youth and Family Advocate, who's done a lot of work around like funding streams and how to maximize federal dollars to support like prevention services. And so I think we have to hold both pieces. But I am curious if there's a way to get responses either from the state or from others around, like, if we were in a state of emergency, what might be an option? What are the barriers to using state buildings for this crisis moment, and seeing if any of those barriers can be lifted?
Yeah, as we're talking about just the GA funding, and sort of holding that at the same time as, I'm looking back at my notes from that very, hopeful morning session. And just thinking about how we've budgeted for different priorities and how all of this money has gone into the GA program for very important reasons. But if the same amount of money that were allocated for an individual family had just been given to that family, like what could they do with that money? Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I'm sitting with at this.
I've been thinking that too. Any other final thoughts? Seth, you look like you're deciding whether to say something.
No. I appreciate the conversation today. And like I said, I wasn't part of the commission prior, so just trying to get caught up on everything. But I do appreciate the dichotomy of the challenge between sort of triage and systems thinking. And that's a complicated piece when you're dealing with the very human, elements that are being discussed in the triage piece. But I do really, I appreciate the significant sort of broader charge of really thinking about the systemic changes that we can do to eliminate or lessen in the long term. So I'm reconciling those two desires.
Okay, there is nothing else. Keep your eye on your emails. There'll be a lot of follow-up things from today. We'll be sending a doodle poll to talk more about scheduling and next steps, including planning kind of an off-site meeting to hear from people out in the field, hear from families living this. So yeah, it was a pleasure to be with all of you today and
So, just for the family, from meeting out in the field, I know we were looking at some questions. Were we maybe online? Can we maybe look at what those questions?
Mike is gonna email them out if he hasn't already.
Okay.
Okay, already, yeah, I've been seeing them pop up. So lots of things to look at, kind of from both events. And so, yeah, I would take a look at them, see what you think, see what maybe we, what's missing, and then we can have a discussion on how we want to frame that event.
Okay.
First, we gotta get it all scheduled.